Chapter 22. Nancy Disappears. Renee snatched the keys to Ned's car from Nancy's hand and whipped a rope from his pocket. Nancy fought desperately to free herself and remove the coat wound around her head, but her efforts were futile. All the while Renee was binding Nancy, he kept mumbling to himself. She caught a word here and there. Their car must be at the end of this trail she and her boyfriend made. I'll move it. Nobody will find it until after I make my escape. When the young sleuth's hands and ankles were securely bound, the man dragged her through the woods. Stones and twigs scratched her, and she gritted her teeth against the pain. In a few minutes he stopped, and Nancy heard a car door open. She was lifted off the ground and shoved inside onto the floor of the back seat. Renee jumped into the front seat, started the motor, and pulled down the road. Nancy, half smothered, berated herself for having let Renee take the car keys from her so easily. The car bumped and swerved in a zigzag route through the woods, and Nancy guessed that Renee was running it in far back from the road among the trees to hide it. Presently, the Frenchman stopped the car with a jerk and turned off the ignition. A moment later, he snatched the coat from Nancy's head, and before she could scream for help, stuffed a gag in her mouth. Glaring at the girl, Renee said, "You will mind your own business from now on, and not interfere with mine. If you do not, I shall not be so easy on you the next time we meet." He rolled up all the windows and slammed the door shut, leaving Nancy huddled on the floor. For several minutes she struggled unsuccessfully with her bonds, but as the car became stuffy, she began to feel faint. "Oh, I hope Ned is more watchful than I was," she said to herself. "It would be dreadful if he were captured too. Renee must have followed us and heard us talking." One thought after another whirled through the young sleuth's mind, but the one which remained uppermost was that Renee had no doubt told them a suave but completely untruthful story. Otherwise, why would he be afraid of Nancy's bringing the police? What a muddle, she thought, completely confused now as to whether or not Hélène and Henri Fontaine were innocent. Instinct told her they were completely blameless, although the evidence on both sides seemed to be contradictory. Nancy's thoughts returned to Ned. What was he doing? Had Renee returned to the house or made his getaway at once? If he failed to go back, his trail would certainly be lost. Nancy continued to fume. Every once in a while, though she knew it was hopeless, she wrenched at her bonds, trying to free herself of the rope and the gag. Ned, a quarter of a mile away, was also fuming. When he had returned to the farmhouse, Renee was not in sight. Ned had pounded on the door, but there had been no response. Suspicious that the man was really inside, but did not dare open the door, he had entered and looked everywhere, but found no one in the dwelling. As he came outdoors, Ned was amazed to see Renee hurrying up the lane. Excitedly, the man said to Ned, "I hoped I'd find you here. Your wife's had an accident down the road. I'm going to phone the police." As Ned stood stunned, realizing Renee meant Nancy, the man dashed into the house and disappeared up the stairway. Ned was torn between a desire to get more details of the accident from Renee and a wish to go help Nancy as quickly as possible. Deciding on the second move, he ran down the lane and turned onto the highway. After sprinting nearly half a mile, Ned stopped. He suddenly realized that Renee could not possibly have come this far and then returned to the farmhouse in the length of time that had elapsed. Maybe someone came along and took Nancy and the damaged car to town, he concluded. Then a second thought struck Ned. Renee's story might have been a hoax. The only way to find out was to return to the farmhouse and confront the man. Turning, Ned sped back toward the lane, his long legs pounding down the highway. While he was still some distance from the lane, he saw a black sedan pull out of it and speed off. Ned was not close enough to read the license number, but he could see that there were 4 people in the vehicle. In the rear seat sat a blond young man and a girl with dark hair. "The Fontaines!" Ned cried out involuntarily. They were prisoners in that farmhouse after all! But where were they hidden? He wondered whether Renee was in the car or still in the house. Deciding to find out, Ned ran to the house and knocked loudly on the door again. No one answered the summons, so he rushed inside. Renee was not in any of the rooms on the first floor. Ned dashed up the stairway and investigated the bedrooms. They were empty, too. "I'll phone the police," Ned decided. Maybe Nancy did reach headquarters after all. Finding a phone in one of the bedrooms, he quickly put in the call. A sergeant answered, and Ned asked for Captain Crane. When the officer said hello, Ned identified himself, then said, "I'm looking for Nancy Drew. She was driving in to see you. Has she arrived yet?" The captain said he had not seen the girl, but would ask the other men on duty at headquarters. In a few moments, he returned to the phone. "Miss Drew is not here. Is there anything I can do for you?" "Plenty," Ned declared excitedly. "After Nancy and I left Officer Donovan, we came back to this old farmhouse. I'm telephoning from there now." Ned told the whole story and concluded with, "I'm afraid Nancy may have been kidnapped by some of the gang we told you about." "Do you want me to send out an alarm for the black sedan?" the captain asked. "Yes," Ned replied. "And I would like some police out here, too. Can you send a man or two to help me hunt for Nancy? She may be a prisoner somewhere in the woods." "I'll do that at once," the officer promised. By this time, dusk had fallen. The frantic youth began to visualize Nancy in the hands of the ruthless smugglers. As he tried to put the horrifying thought from his mind, a car turned into the lane. With a sense of relief, Ned saw a red blinking light on its roof. The police! 2 men had been sent. One of them was Officer Donovan. Quickly, Ned explained in detail his and Nancy's second meeting with Renee. "He tricked me into leaving the house by inventing the story of an accident. Then he escaped by car with 3 other people," Ned finished. "Looks bad," said Donovan. "Suppose we start our search where Miss Drew began her walk through the woods to your car." Ned led the way. It had grown almost dark, and the men had to use their flashlights to pick up the trail. Reaching the spot where Nancy had had the encounter with Renee, they stopped and examined the area carefully. "From here on, there's only a man's footprints going in this direction," Donovan pointed out. "Looks as if he was pulling something. I'd say your friend was dragged from here." "Then she can't be far away," Ned cried. "Renee isn't a husky man and couldn't have dragged Nancy far. Maybe he was heading for my car. Let's look. I left it not far from here." "Okay," Donovan agreed. "You say this French guy got back to the house pretty quick? Would that mean, though, that he'd have had time enough to dispose of the girl and your car?" "Dispose? You mean—" Ned was stunned by the implication. "Sorry to frighten you, young man. I'm only guessing," Donovan declared, continuing to flash his light along the path. About 100 yards farther on, they came to the place where Ned had left his car, but it was not there. Tire marks indicated that it had been driven down the road. Quickly, Ned and the 2 policemen tried to follow the tread marks in the dusty thoroughfare. Presently they came to a place where a car had been driven off the road and into the woods. Ned's heart sank. What was he going to find when he reached his car? End of chapter 22.